On the way to Bisley, William listened to repeats of a panel show Max had downloaded onto the car's stereo. Though he was only distantly aware of the voices of the panelists and the applause of the studio audience, once or twice he heard himself laughing at a joke he would not have been able to recount if anybody had asked him what was so funny. Thoughts surfaced and sank. The conversations he'd had with his mother over Easter about Rupert, her disappointment that Nicole and Max had gone to Italy instead of coming to stay, her complaints of heart palpitations. William knew that for years Bernadette had been fabricating ailments that would justify twice-monthly visits to Dr. Woodfine, who had kind eyes and was rumoured to be a distant relation of the Windsors, but her long-standing hypochondria did not assuage his guilt. There was little hope of recovery. William himself, a doctor, knew that the ambulance, the attempts at resuscitation, were only nominal. In his professional life, he had always thought it a cruelty to draw out a life when it had reached its natural end. But nonetheless, he drove at an anxious speed, praying to Bernadette's God that he would reach Bisley before she was declared dead. When Alistair arrived that evening, William had just got back from the hospital. They ate dinner together, a ravioli dish Bernadette's housekeeper had made and refrigerated in a Tupperware labelled with today's date, and Alistair chose wine from the cellar. As they drank their way through the first bottle of red, the two brothers began to talk instead of their father, who had always been amused by Bernadette's hypochondria. The irony surrounding her unexpected death would have delighted the man who had once convinced his wife that oregano, a distant relation of marijuana, could cause psychosis if consumed in excessive quantities. He would have been glad that she didn't see it coming, William said to his brother. She was always so afraid of death. Rupert arrived the next day. He'd lost his license after his car accident, so William picked him up from the station and the three of them read through the will. Afterward, Rupert took a long walk around the grounds, leaving his brothers with the family lawyer. When they were finished, William went outside to find Rupert, who was sitting on the wall at the top of the garden, smoking. William sat down next to his brother, but couldn't think of anything to say that would comfort him. The time between death and burial was filled with administration. William and Alistair took meetings with their accountant. William booked the parish church for the funeral, and Alistair negotiated caterers' fees. They took turns fielding calls from Dr. Woodfine, who was trying without integrity to establish whether he was about to be sued for professional negligence. At the funeral reception, Max sat with Rupert. They were both drunk, but Rupert more so. He was holding on to a glass of the Free Bar's scotch as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. Max sympathised. He and Lewis had been among Bernadette's pallbearers, and when they'd stepped through the doors of the church and the Requiem Mass had started to play, his shoulders had tensed beneath the weight of the coffin and, for the first time, he had understood that Bernadette was really dead. Now, though, at the bar with Rupert, he was fully subsumed by his bereavement, free to wallow without being taken by surprise. "I missed Easter," he said to his uncle. "I knew she would be upset, but I still missed it." "She was a very sensitive woman," Rupert said, shaking his head and swilling his glass. The movement was too vigorous, and he slipped a little on his stool. He paused and righted himself before he spoke again, and Max did not notice the look Rupert had of biting something back. "She tended to take things to heart." Rupert was drunk the next morning too, and came down to breakfast wearing Gregor's silk dressing gown tied loosely around his thin waist. He stood swaying by the Aga, peering into the bowl of eggs collected that morning by William. "Did you know," Rupert said, turning to face the kitchen table, "that if you squeeze an egg like this—" He held the egg at both ends. "You can't break it. But if you squeeze it this way—" He laid the egg flat on his palm now and closed his fingers around it. "It will." He squeezed as tightly as he could. screwing up his eyes as he did so, and they waited for the crack. But the egg remained whole. The noise of William pushing his chair back jolted Rupert, so that he swung his arm down and smashed the egg against the edge of the worktop. The yolk split, dribbling between his fingers as he lifted his hand, bemused. Zara was instantly at his side with a tea towel in her hand, and she wiped his fingers as she would a child's, while Max and Nicole looked on. Nicole bit her lip and caught her mother's eye. Zara shook her head gently. William stood halfway between the table and the counter, momentarily paralyzed. "Have you showered?" Zara said. "Why don't you have a shower? Come on, William will bring you some coffee." She glanced round at her husband as she led Rupert from the kitchen. William walked slowly to the sink and put the kettle on. Then he stood, his hands resting on the countertop, his head bowed, waiting for the water to boil.